I'm Karen Edwards. I'm the director for the Community University Partnership for the Study of Children, Youth, and Families. And I'm going to be guiding the conversation today entitled Making Lightning Strike, What System Shifts Are Needed to Best Support Community-Engaged Research and Innovation. And as we gather to talk about the ways in which we connect our responsibility to each other and our connection to the land on which we live, work, and play, I want to draw attention to one of the underpinning values of the University of Alberta's Indigenous Strategic Plan, All My Relations, which acknowledges the interconnectedness, interdependence, worth, and mutual responsibility of all peoples, creatures, and lands. And as an uninvited guest on this land, I reflect on my personal and professional commitments to reconciliation. I'm reminded not only to reflect on the colonial histories that shape our work, but act on dismantling the systems that perpetuate inequities. Our contributions to reconciliation may look different depending on our roles and responsibilities. We must seek to always uncover the truth and ensure Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing are at the forefront of our work. In the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, I want to acknowledge the land on which we are meeting today and the wisdom and footsteps that have marked it for generations. The place where we meet is acknowledged as the territory covered by Region 6 and Region 4, the Métis Nation of Alberta, a traditional meeting ground, gathering place, and traveling route for many Indigenous peoples for centuries. And by acknowledging this territory, I respect the histories, ancestors, medicines, languages, and teachings of this land that nurture our spirits and positively impact our lives. It's in reciprocal relationships with Indigenous people that the work we do is possible. A treaty is an inheritance, a responsibility, and a relationship. And we're all treaty people, beneficiaries of the peace and prosperity the treaty brought, and committed also to working towards the equity and justice the treaty promised. May recognizing our status as treaty people help us to be good neighbors to one another, good stewards of the land, and good ancestors to all our children. So today's conversation draws focus and inspiration from three very different but complementary sources. The issues that we see within our community, the need for enhanced collaboration, and the new strategic planning at the University of Alberta. First of all, the issues within our community. Regardless of your organization or role, we are all aware of the resounding urgency of the not-so-hidden issues in our community, such as the unhoused, addictions, drug poisoning, overwhelmed health systems, misaligned social supports, inequities, and increasing mental health concerns. And these issues are not the responsibility of one person or one organization or one system. Whether we name these as complex issues or wicked problems or grand challenges, they touch all of us, and we have a collective responsibility to them. The second issue or focus that's drawn on today is the need for enhanced collaboration. As we think of our collective responsibility to these issues, it leads us to consider our ability to collaborate meaningfully, effectively, and sustainably. CUP is working to support the development of a community-engaged research network in response to the need for better collaboration. And in the last 6 months, we hosted 2 conversations with community and university to inform network development. And from these conversations arose comments that you will recognize. It's so hard to connect to the university. We're doing research in our organization, but we have nowhere to share it. We want to know about recent trends in research that can inform our work, but it's incredibly hard to access. There are great examples of community-engaged research across campus, yet they exist in silos. These sentiments come from community and university partners who are interested in enhancing how we communicate, engage, and innovate. They're interested in creating research and learning opportunities that are relevant and impactful. And the resounding desire amongst participants was to enhance relationships across sectors and systems, to value all forms of knowledge and capacity, to leverage resources, and to engage in projects that bring value to real-time decision-making. The final focus that we draw on today for our conversation is the University of Alberta's recently released Institutional Strategic Plan, SHAPE. The new plan underscores the university's intention for deliberate and useful purposeful action on 3 fronts: education, research, and community engagement. President Flanagan emphasized the vital role the university can play in social and cultural lives of our community and bringing together diverse individuals and communities to pursue shared outcomes and improve the lives of our community. We'll also see the release of a new institutional strategic plan for research and innovation, Forward with Purpose, next week, which will provide more depth to the support that will be an innovation targeted for community-engaged forms of research. I see these 3 forms of inspiration creating space and opportunity for our conversation today. The systems and sectors and structures that complement and clash in this space is where our conversation will focus today. The title for our event, Making Lightning Strike, is actually drawn directly from Cheryl Whiskey-Jack, who's the executive director of Bent Arrow Traditional Healing Society. She was one of the participants in our community conversations when we were talking about this network. And when we were discussing the shifts we need to create change, she said, sometimes you can't wait for lightning to strike. Sometimes you just have to make it strike. And her words captured for me a very exciting sense that it's possible to create change, even systemic change, by fostering the right conditions. So our goal as CUP for this event is to explore the groundwork for conditions necessary to make lightning strike. What's needed for community campus partnerships to flourish, for institutions and systems to respond to living experience, and for research and evidence to be strategically applied to addressing the root causes of public health, poverty, and social inequities. My goal for all of you today is that you walk away with at least one tangible new idea, so that's your job, or a step in mind to shift your work, partnerships, networks, or systems. So I want to encourage all of you to treat today like a connection point, an opportunity to begin and continue conversations with your peers, and a chance to speak honestly about our experiences. I acknowledge the expertise and wisdom each of our panelists brings. However, in the spirit of challenging systems and processes, I'm not going to read their formal bios. Rather, I'd like to explain how I became connected to them and what that connection has meant for me. It's interesting, you're right beside me, but Funke Olokude is the executive director of the Ribbon Rouge Foundation. And I met Funke a little over a year ago when she presented to the CUP Steering Committee about research that she was developing in collaboration with the African, Caribbean, Black community here in Edmonton. She's a social worker with deep roots in Edmonton's social serving sector, and she's developed collaborations between social serving agencies and government, and she's worked on issues like child welfare and housing and healthcare, and in her work, she is always incredibly passionate to bring light to the ways that society, systems, and living experience create complex realities for marginalized individuals, and I admire her work greatly. David Phipps is the Assistant Vice President of Research Strategy at York University, and I had the fortune to meet David and hear him speak and facilitate conversations at the Community University Expo in Thunder Bay this past June. And I was struck by David's energy and candor and passion. He has decades of experience managing research and providing support to researchers and community organizations and government who wish to maximize the economic, social, and environmental impacts of research. He was named the most influential knowledge mobilizer in Canada, and I am super excited for the global and national and regional examples that David is able to offer in our conversation today. Omar, Yaqub, is Servant of Servants of the Islamic Family and Social Services Association, otherwise known as IFSSA. I met Omar for the first time when we were participants in the Max Bell Public Policy Institute many years ago. And since then, I've admired his work as I've watched his organization gain recognition for developing tech that disrupts systemic inequity by shifting their focus to clients achieving goals instead of simply reporting on their outcomes. And Omar and I have had a few meetings recently where I listened with joy to the radical ways that he would like to engage more research in IFSSA's work. And I admit I always walk away deep in thought about how to meaningfully connect university capacity and resources to his ideas. And last but not least, André McDonald, who's the Associate Vice President of Strategic Research Initiatives and Performance at the University of Alberta. I have had the pleasure of being a part of the collaborative work that André's facilitated in developing the university's strategic plan for research and innovation. And I have observed how thoughtful and intentional he is in his work. I greatly admire his work in building the elite program for Black youth, which creates opportunities for Black youth to access hands-on learning and training in the STEM fields, as well as the Black-led Research Network initiative. When I describe André, I really love to say he gets community engagement and he's an engineer. So André, you're a rare breed. And I want to thank all of you for being here today. So that's enough of me talking, but I felt it was very important to set the context for where this conversation emerged from and what I hope that you gain from it, and you actually will contribute to as well. So it's time to start. So I gave each of our panelists a list of 3 questions to think about in preparing for today's conversation. And in my introduction, I mentioned complex societal issues present in Edmonton today. Based on your experience and perspective, what are communities and universities able to accomplish by collaborating on these issues that might be more effective than tackling those issues on their own? Funke, want to start us off?
I was just putting my phone on Do Not Disturb. But good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be here, meet my panelists, some of you who I've met before, and I see amazing people who I've worked with in the audience as well. So I see Dorothy, and of course you know me, I'm going to pick on you as the day goes on. And I see other folks who have done this exact work with me in community. I think to start us off, working in community, sorry, I got distracted. What was your question?
What can we accomplish working and collaborating together that we can't accomplish in addressing these issues on our own?
Oh, okay. I think that's what we do every day. And speaking of people like Dorothy, right, one of the projects, and I'll use lots of examples, as non-profits, I hear echo, is it me? As non-profits, grassroots organization, you hear the echo, right? Yeah.
Someone's phone is vibrating.
Oh, okay, sorry. It's not me, okay, I thought I was vibrating this morning. Okay, so I think as small non-profits, the Ribbon Rouge Foundation is a small grassroots organization. I was actually the first official employee of the Ribbon Rouge Foundation about 2 years ago. Before that, we relied heavily on the University of Alberta to give us CSL students to action most of our projects. So therein just immediately shows you what nonprofits can accomplish, because we lack resources most times, to do most of the work. But I think one of the things that, in my experience, we've been able to do is to bring some of those resources and expertise from institutions to nonprofits to be able to achieve some of the outcomes that we're looking for. I'll give you an example. Michelle is not here right now, but when I met Karen last year, one of the amazing things that also happened was I met Michelle Maroto, who's a professor at Department of Sociology, I think. And we had a brief conversation after the meeting, at COP that day, and we decided to work on a research project together looking at the mental wellness of African Caribbean Black people across Alberta post-pandemic, which is, people think pandemic is over, but the impacts are still with us. And fast forward, so she had a group of students in the winter semester, work on this project, and very quickly, I didn't have the time. As ED, I'm always putting out fires everywhere. But Michelle was so kind, and she got 20 of her students to work on this project. Fast forward a year later, we've been able to get the most amazing, and speaking of Omar's tech and every other person's tech background, we've been able to get the most amazing product Ribbon Rouge could ever have till date. It's launching on Monday, and I'm going to send it to Karen to send it to everyone. It's a dashboard. We would never have been able to produce a dashboard. I hear André saying, a dashboard for a nonprofit, it's almost impossible. But because we were able to, as Ribbon Rouge Foundation, to partner not just to do the research and to get students to help us to do the research, we got 294 respondents. In my world, that is gold, because it's always difficult to get people to participate. But Michelle was able to bring some resources from the university to be able to help us to get people to complete surveys, and she was able to also get honorariums, which is something we don't have most times, to give to participants who are also AECB folks. When I say AECB, sorry, it's African, Caribbean, Black, that's what I mean. So Ribbon Rouge to date has one of the best products in terms of knowledge mobilization and knowledge. And to take it to a different level, we often, as nonprofits, put out products like, reports, research. And at Ribbon Rouge as well, we do a lot of arts-based reporting. But right now we have a tech-enabled way to report some of our findings and our outcomes just because we're able to partner with the university. And I think we're really grateful for that partnership. In particular, it really shows when the partnership and the collaboration is done well, what can be achieved. So I'm going to stop there for now.
Omar, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, thanks. That was a fantastic answer and a great start to the conversation. I think one thing we can be doing is building off each other's strengths. One of the strengths of academia is shining a light on things, reinforcing messages, reinforcing priorities. What nonprofits are often looking for is validation of their thesis, validation of the work they're doing. And so that, I think, is a way for us to think about how do we complement each other. Academics supporting the long view, and nonprofits supporting what are the best questions we should be asking. I think some of the things we often get wrong is sometimes when, no offense to the academics in the room, but starting out with an academic question that isn't connected to the ground game. And that's where I think we both complement each other. I think also one of the things I'd encourage is actually thinking about that relationship differently. I taught in the MBA program for 13 years, so I have a little bit of skin in the game. But it's also how do we connect each other's different paces? Oftentimes we think the academic pace is actually very long, but when we're trying to do student work, we actually kind of work with 2-month cycles. Right? If you think about a typical semester, it's 4 months. You lose the first month because people are figuring out which class they really want to go to and like where to go. And you lose the last month because of exams. And so as academics, how can we take nonprofit problems and boil them down into 2-month problems that are meaningful? And so I think that's a starting point. I don't want to go on too long, but I think that might be a good starting point for how we can collaborate better is thinking about how do we play on each other's strengths.
I will just enable anybody else who'd like to jump in and say anything and add and contribute. This is a conversation, not a boom, boom, boom. So go for it, yeah? Yeah.
I should use the mic. There you go, right? So really great points that I've heard, and I'll probably just add maybe two things to that. So, sometimes in universities, we can tend to work in silos, not because we want to do that, but sometimes, you're doing your research, you get into it, you're solving those equations, or you're answering the big questions of the time, and you just get lost in knowledge creation, right? But what I've, observed over the last 16 years that, I've been here, was for most of it, I was working in a silo, as well, over there in engineering in my lab in the basement of the mechanical engineering building. And then it just dawned on me and said, well, so you publish all these papers and you do all this work, but what impact is that having beyond what you're doing in your lab, right? And I came out not knowing anything about how to work with community at all. And when we created the Elite program, I felt like I wanted to do something but had no idea how to do it. And as a university professor that had contacts in industry, knew how to train students, didn't know how to connect with them and actually bring them into the ecosystem, right? And if I use just that model of how the university and the community can work together, I will tell you this. That experiential learning in innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship program is one of the greatest joys of my life. Not because I created it, but because the community helped me to make it what it is today. I knew nobody in the black community as much as I'm black, right? Because I was always working, didn't have any connections to, anything at all. And, people came around and said, André, this is how you need to do it. You need to go to the high schools. You need to come out and sit and listen to the aunties talk about whatever it is that they're talking about, and then it will merge into a conversation about what they want for their children, right? It was a very good experience that we then pulled into the university ecosystem, got professors in Faculty of Medicine, Engineering, Campus Saint Jean, Augustana, educational psychology, all here at the University of Alberta to come together to then create this engagement with Black Business Ventures Association, with the NBCC, it's a Black Caribbean organization as well. And all of a sudden, we were getting so much support from the community to make this happen, where we had so many students participating in the program. People were providing training as well. It was absolutely marvelous. So that's one of the ways in which, for sure, the university and a community can engage. But the takeaway that I want you to walk away from that is that the focus was on the youth. The focus was on upward mobility, right? And it both gave us at the university and in the community a purpose to work towards, right? But we were, as I said before, not really sure how to do it, but the community came through for us. The second point that I'll add is around impact. So again, maybe I'm looking at this through the engineering lens initially, but usually over in STEM, we think of impact as how many citations you can get on your paper and how many papers you publish, right? And when we went to the community and said, how do we measure impact for programs that we have here? Tell us. They were so happy to tell us in their way what that actually meant. It was tremendously useful. So now we don't worry about if you have 30 students in the program or 50 students, it doesn't matter. It's what are those students doing after they complete the program? How are they making a difference in their communities? Are they participating? Are they bringing other students into the fold as well? That's the measure of impact for these types of programs. Now, taking that example, how do we broaden that to the university community research, education, perspective, right? And then you'll start to see such marvelous differences. But I can tell you, through my example and me working here at the university, I would never have been able to do that without engaging with community, because they told us what to do. What we brought to the table was how to help to implement that and how to help to design that and then bring it back and forth in an iterative process. So I'll stop there.
Awesome. David, do you have anything you want to add quickly?
I don't know the Edmonton context. I'm from York University in Toronto. Excuse me. But maybe I'll ask André. One of the, because we had a wonderful chat this morning, and what we University of Alberta, York University, part of a network called Research Impact Canada, where we see lots and lots of promising practices. And so, André, one of the things that we've done at York to answer the question of how does how does community gain access to university? Where's that pipeline? And one thing that we've done in our knowledge mobilization unit is we've hung up a shingle and said, if you ever want to talk to a researcher, give us a call. Don't cold call my researchers because they won't call you back, or you'll get that person who should never ever talk in public and just doing great work. So we try and find we know the researcher that wants to collaborate. We know the researcher that isn't overload teaching or isn't about to go on parental leave. So our role is to help broker those collaborations, because we're big monolithic institutions, and there are some doors like CUP that some people can tap, but we've set that up in the office of the Vice President Research and Innovation. Not that you have to do that, but I'm just saying that's one way that we've created some permeability between the university and our local community.
If I may just, add on to that, I really love that. And essentially what I'm hearing, from what you're saying is look for standing to engage, right? So in other words, what's the excuse as to why I'm gonna drive over to downtown Edmonton to have a chat or a coffee with a community partner, right? Look for that excuse. And I think, I would agree with you 100%. The way how I, usually, fashion the conversation is and it may sound a little bit selfish, but what is in it for me, in that conversation? So think about it through the lens of the researchers. They want to train students. What's in it for the community partners? I think Funke just said it. They got great, highly qualified personnel to come in and help to build out the database and the dashboard, right? So you got the engineers and the computing scientists coming in to learn about how to work with community groups, because as computing scientists, we may build stuff, but we have no idea how to talk to someone in the community, right? So now we're giving them that exposure, right? But they're getting actual training towards their educational pursuits, towards their research, which is brilliant. So now we have standing and we're now having that conversation, right? And then the relationships build over time.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to add one little piece to what you just said. And also what's in it for the folks that are connected. One thing that we did was to name the 20 students. We named the 20 students who worked on the research. You're going to see them on the website, not just the professor. And that's how we work in community.
So you've all sort of alluded to some of those amazing examples. You're actually leading some of them, you're involved in some of them, and those examples in some of the things that you've just described, they're successful because the partners carve out space for strengthening those relationships. So as you just said, André, kind of making the excuse. And for some people, it's not the excuse, it's just the form of their research. That's what they're doing. We address structural boundaries, because lots of times we try and do things in systems, but there's not a way to do that. So how do we get through that struggle? They leverage opportunities, and they invest significant time and resources into maintaining the momentum. This is one of the things, a lot of the times I think there's always a lot of stops and starts. And in the community, you don't have time for stops and starts, right? So what are the conditions that we need to be in place for communities and researchers to work effectively together to create impact? What conditions do we need to make lightning strike? Omar?
Yeah. I alluded to this earlier. I think it's asking the right question that's the right fit. If we're working with student researchers, it's how do you make that question fit for someone who's really new to the area and something that's they can meaningfully answer in 2 months. And that's tough. It's not easy. I think oftentimes the answer is maybe a university research project isn't the right fit for the scope of problem you're doing. And I think we have to be accepting of that. I think some of the things we can be thinking if we're in faculty or in other spaces is maybe we can break this into smaller problems for someone, helping them understand how to make this problem work for someone who's totally new to your area, doesn't speak any of the language, is trying to get to speed on basics of nonprofits, let alone like the niche that you're in. One thing I just wanted to pick up on that earlier conversation was some of the opportunity that's in it for academia is oftentimes it can be really difficult to talk to the person who's across the hall from you. And one of the things that can inspire you to connect with your coworkers in the same department or other departments in the university is having a project that you can jointly work on. Something early on in my career I got to do was Google brought a bunch of us into their Mountain View headquarters. This is really, really back before like Gmail and Maps and all these things were super integrated. But the reason they brought us on as a nonprofit was we were a patient subject and they could see what collaboration looks like between their different departments by working with us. So in helping our group solve our problems, they were also solving their own problems of how do you get the Maps people and the Mail people to talk to each other.
That's the mutuality, right? Is you're not just getting our problem solved, you're helping Google or someone else solve their problems. So I think one of the conditions is that mutuality of benefits. They'll look different on different sides of the equation, but both needing to come in there, and it's not my thing I'm asking you to work on, right? It's a thing that we find that we need to do together. And it's the values is it's what we bring to the table. So community will have access to data that the academy doesn't. The academy might have access to a library that community doesn't. So how with a shared interest and shared benefits, even if those look different, we can combine the resources that are present in both community and academia to get both needs met.
Sorry, I just want to add to that. Great responses already, and I think clarity is important. clarifying expectations, not just at the beginning, but as you work on the relationship is very important. David, we were talking about sort of like sometimes it's the expertise. We always collect a lot of data. We're like data overload. We have so much information, but sometimes you don't even know what to do with it. And that was when Dorothy, one of the projects I worked with Dorothy, sorry, Dorothy, I'm picking on you because you're right in front of me as well. Dorothy was an evaluator on the project, right? Because we just, as a nonprofit, didn't have capacity. Even at that, both of us were banging our head, trying to figure out what the institution wanted from both of us. And Dorothy is a seasoned evaluator, right? And we had the data, but we just couldn't handle the data, and she helped me make sense of the data that we had, right? So even sometimes that expertise is always very welcomed, but clarifying everybody's role is also equally important, because one of the biggest challenges I've had is in terms of publication. Sorry, all academics. I'm going to put that out there. It's when you want to publishing is an issue, right? Sometimes clarifying that at the beginning of the relationship that, yes, I am a professor, I am an academic. We know in community, but most of us know you need this, right? That is how you justify the work you come and do in community. But that's not what community cares about. That's not what the people I'm interviewing or being in the folk, that's not what they care about. What they care about is change. What they care about is that there's a little bit of movement in whatever issue we're hoping to tackle together. So making that clarity up front is very important. And then I'm going to say this was something I learned the hard way. So, and I'm still, working through it, working with academics, is that and it was also a challenge I posed to a group of academics I was working with. Whenever you're going to publish, we're just going to say it now, make sure you name the community as well. Make sure. If we're really working towards equity, then you must name the community. For me, in that space, maybe the academics thought I wanted bragging rights as well. I said, no, I'm ED today. I'm going to be gone. Actually, I'm gone tomorrow, right? I don't care if it's my board chair that reviews that document. I don't care if it's a community member that reviews that document. Name them in your publication. Please do not leave community out of your publication as well.
And if I can just, add to that, 100% can't agree, with you enough on that, right? So, maybe I'll look to, Funke, I'll look to you, Omar, just for some thoughts on this. But in terms of what needs to be there for the relationship, I'm just gonna say trust, right? If that's not there, then it's never, going to happen. I want to just tell you a really quick story about, something that happened to me personally, right? So I'm over at Heritage, the park here for Heritage Day, right? And I saw the Jamaican booth, and I heard about the Jamaican, Northern Alberta Association. I'm thinking, ooh, I'm going to go over there and tell them about the elites. I walk over there in my dirty sandals and my shorts to go and have a conversation. And they looked at me and I said, I have this great program and I want to talk to you about it. I'm at the university. And no smiles on the face. You're just like, who are you? You are a professor? What do you teach? And I was shocked, because who are you? I don't know you. Are you here to use me? I've been, taken advantage of before, right? So I think that really sent a signal to me as a great example that if the trust isn't there, how can we actually have that relationship? And what you just mentioned, Funke, is really a good point on that, because if a researcher comes in, takes the data, takes the knowledge, doesn't give credit, right, appropriately, right, then people feel used, right? We can, just say it candidly in the room, right? So why would I, as a community member, want to even work with a researcher on future projects, right? But once that trust is there, let me tell you, the amount of support that you get from community and the results, the outcomes that come out of that are just brilliant. I have no other words to say it in terms of university community engagement towards some kind of outcome, whether or not that's student teaching and learning, training experientially or in the field, or perhaps, data for research, as the case may be, right? So I just definitely want to just echo that. The trust piece, it's really, really very important. Thank you.
Can I jump back on something Funke said about clarity of roles? Because this came up yesterday, and I want to just pull on that a little. And it's really maybe for Omar and Funke to talk about from the community side. This came up yesterday when we were talking, and it's so important. But I said I am of two minds around the terms of reference for a project, right? My one mind is you need to discuss it and you get clarity of roles. My other mind is we use so much time getting the perfect words into that terms of reference. So where's that balance? What have you found in your projects with the university? Do terms of reference help, or do they get in the way?
I can talk a little bit about what we've done. We've created a research policy internally for our organization. What that does is it helps academics or others when they approach us to know what our expectations are. It's based on what we learned from OCAP, which is an Indigenous set of protocols around data governance and engaging Indigenous communities, which are often over-surveyed. The reason we did this was academics would often come to us, ask us a bunch of questions. I remember this one university researcher from Laval reached out to us to ask about domestic violence. And I glanced briefly at their survey. It was like an hour and a half. I'm like, I'm not doing this. I don't know what they want to do with it. I'm not sure what their intent is. Anyway, I started the survey, and then I got a call the next day saying, hey, we noticed you didn't complete the survey. I'm like, yeah, I didn't complete the survey because it was obscene how long it was. I don't know what your intent is. You haven't told me this, this, and this. And then she's like, oh, I can't do any of those things. Well, I'm like, okay, then we're done. But then I get like 40 more emails encouraging me to finish the survey. I'm like, oh, okay, this is what bad research, and this is what a bad relationship looks like. I think what David and André were saying is it's important that we have trust, but I think trust also requires certain protocols. So, not necessarily just in terms of reference, but here's what we expect when you engage our community. There's an expectation that this is the protocol or honorariums that are there. There's an expectation that the data is shared back and credited, and that has to be spelled out. I recently, just a few weeks ago, got a message from a PhD who just finished his PhD after like 6 years. And he's like, hey, I want to let you know I didn't forget about my side of the bargain. Here's the credit. Here's the work we did. And so it's good to have those things kind of proactively ready. Here's our research protocols. Spell it out for academics. Spell it out for yourselves so you know what to expect, because you might be adding additional work on top of your staff and what they're already doing. If they're doing research and it takes them away from their work, what does that mean internally? Those are things that I think we need to answer. And if we don't think about it proactively, it's going to get messy. And so if people want to see our research protocols, they can go to share.islamicfamily.ca/research, and it's there for others to use as well.
So I'll just add quickly with a story. I remember I joined the Ribbon Rouge Foundation October 2021, and the first task I had was to fix the bear. Most of you may have heard about our bear initiative. And my board just said, fix this. And they presented at that time, terms of reference or memorandum of understanding between, it's 13 sub-projects. So it's a big project. So each project is a research project on its own. And they said, fix this. And at that time, lawyers from all of the 5 institutions that are part of this research were already involved at that time. So the lawyers, and the U of A is involved. So I think your research office was involved already. And I looked at it, and the first thing I said was, we're going to change the name. We're going to call it a collaborative agreement. That was the first thing I did. Because when we're collaborating, it sets a different tone versus a time. Those are great words, but when I looked at the research, I'm like, language is important. And the language with which we're entering into those conversations were very highly charged. And the second question I asked was, because that research project has professors, lots, has interns, about 16 interns are students. And my tax is also funding that project as well. So there's lots of students. So there's different parties that have interests in that project. And of course, the Ribbon Rouge as the community partner. And I got into the meeting and I said, who are we centering? Because I was hearing the universities, I was hearing the interns, rights for the interns, I was hearing rights for Ribbon Rouge. But the community was lost again. And the sticking point, we went through everything, it was great, and the sticking point for over a month was IP, intellectual property. I'm like, no, people, everything we're going to get belongs to the community. It doesn't belong to Ribbon Rouge. It doesn't belong. So we had to write into that agreement that Ribbon Rouge will hold in custody whatever products we get. in trust for the community. But sometimes when we enter into those, we're trying to clarify, but the most important and the essence gets lost. So even the language and the spirit with which we enter into those conversations is also very important as well. And that's why we build trust. And that document is living and breathing. It's not a static document. We keep revising it because, again, ideas around equity, diversity, inclusion is changing every day. So that's where we keep revising it. We come together quarterly to look at that document. We signed it 2 years ago. Does it still obtain for the interns, for the universities, for the community as we're creating? So we're always co-designing and co-creating together. And that trust, that relationship has been amazing.
You guys are on fire.
Let me
Yes.
add another one, really quickly. And I know it's a bit of an elephant in the room, but I'll just say it anyway. I've been having a little bit of, it's exciting, so it's an opportunity, but a little bit of a challenge trying to start this out. But one of the things to add to the list is actually money, right? We need money. We talk about creating the relationships between the university, community, maybe other groups as well, but they're not sustainable if there isn't some pathway to sustainability, right? And that's something that personally and professionally I've been grappling with as I look to engage, right? Because, the government doesn't always open up the coffers to support a lot of the things. They do in some cases, or coming up with creative ideas, whether or not it's engaging with industry foundations and things like that. So I just want to put that out there as a tangible, point to always be, thinking about, because I can tell you, trust me, in this role as a professor, in this role as associate vice president, I'm always thinking about money, but being careful not to make money the thing that drives the conversation all the time. The money is the means to get the things done, right? But we do need to talk about that, and that usually is a barrier because, again, professors, community partners, we meet, we go for coffee, we talk, we have these great ideas, but then how do we get the people paid? How do we get the students, stipends, right? How do we get the community to, give honoraria to the participants in the surveys and the things that we do, right? So I guess, that's a conversation for another time about solutions to some of these, I guess, but I'll just maybe put that out there as well. Thank you.
One way to think about money is also, money's a motivator, right? If we do this well, we're creating money on the table, putting money on the table. For a nonprofit to point to research that validates the assumption is something that supports a grant application and vice versa. So as much as money is an early constraint, it's also important to identify it as a motivator that this collaboration will support an increase in funding, or at the very least, maybe lead to, hey, that's a dumb idea and we're not going to do that and save money.
Can I just, Heather, who's sitting behind Jim, so does the University of Alberta it has a SSHRC institutional grant? And is there the Explore or Exchange Knowledge Mobilization stream to that grant at the University of Alberta? So there's a small pot of money that faculty members have access to in SSHRC disciplines that funds. At York, it's up to $7,000, but it's internal. SSHRC gives the university the money, but it's administered internally. So there's a small pot of funds that faculty members can have access to to fund their knowledge mobilization activities, of which community engagement would be one of the eligible activities. So there is a small solution to seed some of these early activities, and Heather now has her hand up.
I just want a little caveat. André probably knows more about this than I do. There's a bit of a caveat in that fund has historically been managed by one of the associate vice presidents of research, and they funneled that money through the associate deans in the faculties. So it hasn't been something that a faculty member could go directly to apply for.
We hold it centrally.
Yes. Whether it's going to carry on that way is above my pay grade.
But what a fantastic segue to my next question. You guys just right on it. We're going to questions already, are we?
Or questions to engage the panel.
Okay, sure. What is with the rabble-rousers from Cup over there? Come on now.
Writing notes.
Would you like me to run a mic?
Sure.
So there is a question, but I have a lot to say. So I want to say the question first and then do the background behind the question. And the question is, I was more than envious yesterday when you were talking about all of the infrastructure you have at York to support this kind of work. So my question is aligned with yours, Karen, don't worry. It is about the conditions needed to create that infrastructure. Like what are the pressure points that York experienced to say, okay, we need to move into this space in a really deliberate and formal way? Because we don't have it at this institution. And André, I am not, I'm not critiquing my colleague who's here from the institutional perspective, because he is a trusted colleague and an ally. So please, it's not like directed to André here. But this work is not valued at our institution. Our new budget model, we're getting into a little bit of kind of the weeds here, does not acknowledge this work. It is what brings the money into the institution. So when we were cut years ago by our government, bazillions of dollars, there was no community outcry. There was no, hey, stop, hell no, don't do this, because we didn't have the relationship with the community for the community to say, don't do that. That institution is valuable to us. So there was just silence. And so as we go along and we are more and more required to do activity that is not community engaged, we're losing ground in this space. So we can talk about the best partnerships and the best trust and relationships and all that stuff, but the bottom line is for our people within this space, the activity is not valued, and we're pulling away from it now more than going toward it. So that is the reality coming from this this side of the equation. And so my question, to circle back, is what do we do to get that infrastructure at the university so that we have permission and our work is valued formally?
I think André and I'll tag team this one. You saw yesterday a wonderful, I'm going to say it was wonderful, because this is my story.
I will confirm it was wonderful.
A wonderful picture that took 20 years to make, right? It's not anything that happens overnight. As I told the story yesterday, one driver was partly our program mix, in that when we started this work in the early 2000s, we had very little amount of engineering. We don't have a medical school, and we were founded, and our roots are in social justice work and liberal arts, professional studies, social science, humanities, and creative arts. So that was partly our program mix. Partly it's our very close relationships with community. Our geography has us right at the north end of Toronto, so our closest neighborhood is the Jane Finch neighborhood, but just north of us is York Region, which is a very diverse region with areas of inner city poverty, also agriculture and rural and an indigenous community. And the Vaughan has the largest largest percentage of Ferraris in North America. So like ranches and vast wealth as well, and the environmentally protected Oak Ridges and moraines. So our geography works for us to be engaged. I would say that there's two other things to add to that. Was my capacity. I came to York in 2003 from commercialization. I was a university industry partnership person, and I get into this social justice space and go, we're doing nothing to broker all of this amazing research relevant to public policy, social services, and professional practice. And then the last thing is leadership. Our vice president research at the time was an educational psychologist whose research was in the classroom looking to get better outcomes for kids. And he always said research needs to leave the university to make a difference. So those were our drivers and opportunities. It didn't happen overnight. I have been there 20 years minus a month. Is that right? Yes, 20 years minus a month. So I think, though, having spent only a short time with André, but I've known Heather and Thane Chambers here at Alberta for a long time. And I think my assessment is that pieces are there. They're not necessarily all together. that I haven't seen the plan that was recently released, the institutional plan, but with community engagement being a third pillar. And we'll all see, holding our breath to see what the research plan will look like next week. I always say that the thing, you need leadership and it needs to be in your plans. If it's not in your plans, it's going to be a marginal activity that someone's doing off at the side of our desks off soft money. But planning drives resources. And so I'll turn it to André to see if you've got the third leg of the plan. And it's not about money. Not yet. It's not about money. It's about recognition of the importance of the work.
Yeah, and 30 seconds, because I know, Karen, but I am so happy, Maria, that you posed that question. I actually really am, and I'll tell you, the reason why. I, agree with, David's assessment. He's, coming in from outside, and he heard, me talk about it this morning with, Heather at a breakfast meeting and everything. And I will tell you what's happening. The pieces are there for sure. They're, starting to come together, and if you remember, and I'll look at, Maria, and I'll bring in something from our personal experience. You were at a URIAC meeting, that's the University of Alberta Research and Innovation Advisory Committee, and you said something, and I was sitting in the back, you were sitting, we were in that fancy chamber room over there somewhere where the president's office used to be, and you said, I don't see social innovation in here, and University of Calgary is doing this, and the website is here. And I stand in the back and I say, what's social innovation? So I went, this is a year and a half ago, and I went online and I did a Google search, and as you know, Maria's like talking away, I just did my research, right, and I'm taking notes because I'm the one shepherding the strategic plan for research and innovation at the University of Alberta. Only been in this role for about a month. So my point with telling that story is it started with you. You started the conversation, right? And what ended up happening is I just wrote social innovation into the strategic plan and I made it a thing, right? And then Amina, our Vice President of Research and Innovation, made it a thing. So the persons who we hire had to talk about that. And then more questions were asked, right? Then the president made it a thing. And then we're at a retreat and someone says, but wait a minute, to your point, how come the community outside didn't fight for the University of Alberta when those cuts happened? So now it's in leadership conversations. So now what's happening is the leaders are saying, what are we doing? And all of a sudden in the university strategic plan, outreach with communities is there because of that one conversation, and we just started talking about it even more, right? So I think, that is starting to change. Now, what needs to happen more, I will be honest with you, is more resources need to be put to that. The good news is it's starting, right? With the conversations with us, committing, to, research support funds, with us hiring a performance assessment officer to look at an impact framework. And we're actually putting money towards that, us wanting to talk to RIC a bit more, things like that. So that's the good news, right? So I'm hoping that it won't take us 20 years. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, because I do agree that we have the capacity and we have the motivated researchers and other partners here, right, who want to actually make this happen, right? So, but I'm hoping to learn from York, though. I will be honest with you. So we will be, reaching out and taking you on your, kind offer to really help us with the officers that are coming in to help to really build that out.
Well, I won't disparage you too much, Maria, because you did lead us into where my question is going anyway. So that's okay. But I appreciate the responses and the connecting the dots. We've talked lots about the conditions, and we're leaning now our conversation into the systems that support the work. And I'm interested to hear from Omar and Funke about, from a community perspective, what does a sustainable system look like for collaboration? What would that look like? Because it's really easy, I think, to talk about the university perspective, from a researcher perspective, what might that look like? But from a community perspective, what does sustainability, a sustainable system for collaboration look like?
Well, I think it starts with curiosity. I think it also involves going beyond the surface level. I think nonprofits are set up to fail, and often as nonprofits, we perpetuate systemic inequity. And if we want to address that disastrous cycle, we have to look at some of the foundational issues. So what are the things we measure? How are we measuring them? How do we build systems? So for us as a social service organization, one of the things we're working on is a digital assistant for frontline workers. And what that system does is it actually dramatically shifts the way we measure. So instead of measuring things at a programmatic level in a retroactive manner that is often just there to justify funding and actually frustrates frontline workers who have to collect that data, the data we collect is real time, meant to be interactive, and meant to focus on individual goals. That to me is a systems disruption, right? We're measuring things in a very, very different way. That requires the best of academic thinking and the best of frontline work and collaborating together and thinking about what is the deeper problem we're trying to solve. Early in my career, one of the things I helped start was SROI Alberta, Social Return on Investment. The goal of that was, can we do for the social services sector what ROI does for the business sector, right? So you want to invest in 2 stocks. ROI is this quick measure to say, hey, put $100 here, it'll give me 105 back. Or if I put it in here, it'll give me 110. This is a better investment, right? In social services, do we know who is going to do a better job of recidivism? Do we have tools to do that? To me, that's actually a fundamental research question that requires digging deeper and thinking about some of the ways things operate and how do we address systemic inequity. And so to answer Karen's question, I think that curiosity about not just answering the question that's being asked, but actually trying to understand the deeper meaning of the systems that are there and how do we drive towards a more just solution, I think is fundamental. One thing I'd also add, which hasn't been asked, which I think is important, is to think about different disciplines and how they can apply to the work. And so it's great that André's here and he's from engineering. And oftentimes we don't think about engineering and community connection and social work or other nonprofit community collaborations, but I think it's vital. For us as an organization, we are thinking about how does UX and user design apply to the work we're doing? How does economics and even tax optimization apply to some of the questions? And so there's many disciplines which don't necessarily see their intersection with community work, but I think that just requires a bit more curiosity and a bit more interaction. One of our board members and volunteers is a lead in the artificial intelligence space. And through our collaboration, we were able to think about, these are the practical applications of AI in summarizing case notes for a social worker and making their life easier. So a bit of an all-around answer, but hopefully that helps.
Awesome. Funke.
Yes, I think my brain was just going in so many different directions, even from the previous question as well. And I really got stuck on why there was no community outreach, right? Because I see the value, and I didn't know it was, when you asked the question, I saw Rebecca. I didn't know Rebecca was hiding there as well. Hi, Rebecca. So I see the benefit, and that's why I know lots of people in this room. I really, really do, even before I joined Ribbon Rouge, in terms of having that connection. But it goes back to something André said before about how does community feel when the institutions are gone, right? If we feel used, if we feel like we're not getting anything back, if that's the sense that we have in Edmonton, of course there's not going to be an outreach. So I think one of to your question, one of the things I would suggest is how we even, as academics, engage with community. We need to think, most times when institutions are coming, they're coming with a certain narrative and a certain ideology, which is baked into the institution and what you're doing, right? You're coming with a dominant narrative of the Western ways of doing things. If I use Ribbon Rouge as an example, we're an Afrocentric organization, right? We focus on African, Caribbean, and Black people. So that might not fit into what we're trying to solve, right? And sometimes, like Omar was saying, we end up, because maybe we need the resources sometimes, we end up perpetuating the very things that we're trying to get away from. So how do we even enter into that relationship? How do you approach that partnership is also important sometimes for us to think about as institutions to build everything else we've said before, to build clarity, to build trust. But again, knowing that you're coming, I was sitting in a meeting recently, and it's a new research project that is starting. I'm just going to use this example to explain what I'm trying to say because I think I'm in my head right now. And even the students, so working with professors and the students, and it's an interdisciplinary research project, so professors from different departments, different faculties coming together. And even the grad students were saying, oh, we're going to go there and teach them. I'm like, no, people. No, I said some of the people in community, some of us who choose to work in community have PhDs. But we decided to work in community. I don't have a PhD, by the way. But some people decide to work in community, right? That's what drives them. So just because someone works in community doesn't mean they don't have the expertise or the knowledge that is required. So coming in there and saying, we're going to teach them, right? So the university has a part to play. How are we, socializing our students? How are we socializing our budding researchers to think about community and those who are in community? Beyond just academic credentials, I sit most times in meetings with community members, and I'm a fly on the wall because I learn amazing things. Going back to what you were saying, André, right? Just sitting there and listening is beautiful because it's not just the lived experience. Some people are living the experience every day. I was sharing with Karen the day we were chatting that sometimes as academics, you come in, you take the data, you're ready to publish. By the time you're publishing, oops, that's where social innovation comes in. It's dated because people are living and they're finding new ways to thrive every day. So that's why, again, it's very important, right? How you're collaborating, that the expertise is on the ground. And I think we need to start teaching that in curriculum, in classrooms, to reinforce that even when we come into community to partner, to collaborate, the expertise is in community.
So I'll actually build on both Omar and Funke's point in terms of the systems, right? And maybe this might be a little bit, say, quote unquote bias from my end as a professor, at the university and really working with the training of youth. But I think from a systems perspective, really positioning the relationships around training people, right? I think that's really important. From my experiences so far, just working with the elite program alone, you'd be impressed at how motivated and how energetic the young people are in terms of really helping us to build the relationships as a university with community and driving it. I'll give you an example just as a takeaway that builds a little bit on Omar's part. So I'm all about the STEM stuff, definitely, and seeing students who are from computing science, who they have no idea about what it means to work in community, get excited by the fact that they're creating, again, a dashboard, or they're creating some kind of, app or something to that effect to get mental health data to engage, through Alberta Health Services, as the case may be, especially with underrepresented, groups in our community. It's amazing how much they start to get less excited about the coding and more excited about what the code is going to be doing outside of the lab, right? And what that ends up doing is then I get a lot of calls from the community members either saying, can we rehire more, or hey, I want to show you what we've done as a result of the engagement. They're just super excited by it because they were so motivated by the student engagement. So from a systems perspective, really building things around moving the students from the university to work with the community, I think is great. One final point that I will say, again, from personal experience, some of you may know Professor Philomena Okiki here, right? Works a lot with, Africa Center, the Black community, and one of the things she said to me, which really resonated, was, I am a women and gender studies professor, and I want to get students working in the community to give them experiential opportunities so they can get a job when they're done. That is what I'd like to do to leave as my legacy at the University of Alberta. That's what she said to me. And that really resonated with me very well because essentially she's saying that the community wants this. They want a systems approach to this. They want this built in where the students are driving the conversation as well, but keeping the professors and the community partners together, because the students are right there in the middle, almost as the liaison of this, right? If we can take that approach, that would be good. And I can tell you, my tax will probably fund it because they love it. Research will probably fund it because they love it. Guess what? Even NSERC will love it because I'm working on my discovery grant right now, and they're asking me, what is the impact of codings in the field? And then I have to talk about that. So my point is that, the funding is there. May not be as much as we would like, but at least it's giving us something to build on to, Omar's earlier point as well. Thank you.
His discovery grant is due November 1st. Glad you are here contributing.
David, talk about the Harris Center.
Pardon?
The Harris Center example.
Yes, of Yaffle? No.
No, not Yaqub.
What did you talk about?
This is a lesson I've learned from our relationship with Research Impact Canada. So you guys know about the Harris Center. There's a center at Memorial University called the Harris Center. They had some funding available, and they set up a program whereby the community members were the adjudicators of applications for funding. And so the community decided which projects they wanted to fund. The researchers made the pitch, the community chose those things, and then they got to go into the research or not. So they shifted the power of control over what kind of research gets done, what research is appropriate and to the public good, which we all remember that slogan. And so it really did make a difference, but it also meant that the researchers were able to build a connection and learn more about the community where they were going to be doing the work. And if they didn't have that connection, they were not accepted. It's a great example.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that. I've
You were
learned
thinking of
something.
Yaffle, yes, which is a pipeline to get.
Yaffle's a
requests,
different
yeah.
thing, but I didn't know that community were adjudicating the Harris Center's opportunities. That's very cool.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm aware that we have so much time left, and I feel like a vibe or maybe a vibration coming off the community sitting in front of us. To help, some people have already jumped in, but to engage and to have your turn in the conversation. And one thing that actually is just really come from the things that I've been hearing all of you say, and I saw this week on a post somewhere, but that sort of sense that community is not a noun. It's an active, it's not static, it's a living thing, that it's a verb. Like, we are in community together, right? And so it isn't just a one-time visit, it isn't just a one-time opportunity, it's a relationship. And we need to nurture those things. And so I'm curious from you folks in the crowd, who has a piece, a comment to add, a question to pose? And you need a microphone because we were recording our conversation.
Let me just say, even if you have a loud voice, some people living with hearing loss do benefit from a mic, even if you have a loud voice.
We can keep a mic circulating.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask André about the challenges that, like maybe André and Funke, the challenges that you guys experience interacting with especially the Black community, in gaining their trust and working with them. Thank you.
Maybe I'll go first. Yeah, sure. The difficulty that I would say that I had initially coming from the university was really to speak the language of community, right? There are some things in engineering culture that sometimes we can be transactional. And sometimes, when you work with community groups, you just need to sit quiet and listen, right? And learn, And it's okay if the meeting takes 2 hours. And that was something that posed a challenge, at least for me, personally, right? And that thankfully has been overcome. So like a little bit more more relaxed right now. The other thing that I think was a challenge as well was you don't need to get to the point right away. Again, it's a question of efficiency. Maybe it's, training background, really needing to reposition and, train the way how, we would engage. And when I say I really mean we on the elite program, especially because we're all engineers, scientists, and we do have some, psychologists there, and they tend to be a bit more, in terms of how they engage, they take their time, right? So I would say, those are some of the things. The other thing that also comes to mind that also created a barrier was, if you're not known by the people because you've never engaged with the community, and then you have this brilliant idea and you come, don't expect that they're going to trust you right away. You need to build that relationship, right? So a lot of these barriers, I think, were kind of coming from us, not so much the community, to be quite honest with you, because we didn't spend the time initially to learn, what's going on in the community, spend time to understand without expecting any benefit to us in our, priorities of what we were trying to do. We just wanted to get in and be like, we got this great idea, let's go, giddy up, move, Now it's a different, it's a different thing. It's more about what's in it for community. What do you need? What's going on here, right? And then if it makes sense to talk about what we're doing in the elite program and with the, foundations that we work with, then we bring it up. Otherwise, we just have a nice time and make some new friends and ask how can we support you, and that's it.
Can I ask André to reflect on when you went up to that Jamaican booth at the fair, and the first thing you said was, "Hi, I'm from the university," and what would you do differently if you were to approach that booth again?
Oh, yes. Well, the first thing that I would do differently is maybe, at the time, talk about what music, they were playing, maybe talk about, the food that they were selling. Hey, what's this artwork over here? What's going on? Hey, I'm Jamaican heritage. Where are you from? Montego Bay? Mandeville? Oh, yeah, my grandmother came from Spanish Town, and she was born in 1909. You remember Rundown? You used to eat that with saltfish and ackee, maybe to versus, hey, I'm from the University of Alberta, and I got a money-making thing that I got for you. Like, hey, are you ready? That's what I would have done differently.
So you're a community member too.
That's true.
And I think I really like your question, David, because that's the difference. The Western ways, hi, I'm so and so, I'm from the university. Whereas the Afrocentric ways for you to just stop and just have a whole conversation with someone you don't know about their grandma, their auntie. That's the Afrocentric way. Right? And I think that is something that, going back to your question about the challenges, right? We often start from the Western way in trying to engage with the African, Caribbean, and Black community. And I say African, Caribbean, and Black, even though it's a mouthful, it's easier for me to say Black, on purpose, because that was another challenge. When you lump every Black person together, you start to, especially in the healthcare, when we're thinking about health equity, you start to prefer the same solutions for everybody. I'm first generation immigrants. I'm from Nigeria. My ancestry is Yoruba, right? It's very different from people who came, whose ancestors have been here 3-4 generations, but still identify as Black, right? And it's going to be different. I have 2 amazing kids who were born in Canada. It's also going to be different for them, right? Although they're Black, they're Canadian. They've always only known Canada. Although they beg me wanting to go back to Nigeria, when I have the money, I'll take them, right? So again, you see, there's already diversity. Even I'm from English-speaking Africa. Again, we're colonized by the British in Nigeria. It's quite different from people who were colonized by the French, right? So there's all these multiple layers of diversity within the Black community that often doesn't bubble up most times, and that was a challenge. And that diversity led to a lot of still happening now in Edmonton within the communities trying to figure out where they fit and how do some of these issues we bring to the ACB community, how does it fit in terms of research as well, right? When we come with this, it goes back to Omar asking, what are the right questions to ask? Knowing that that exists, well, how would you pose your research questions for the ACB communities differently? Right? It starts there. And also, another hat I wear is I am the president of the Nigerian Association in Edmonton as well. So I've worked deep in the ACB community for a long time. And just, there's a lot of trauma as well that we don't hold space for. There's a lot of trauma in the ACB community in terms of colonization and some of that internalized, oppression and things like that that we often do not talk about. And thankfully, but sadly, in 2020 with the George Floyd and a few different things and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, some of those things have been started to be addressed now, but we need to be intentional. And those starting from the basis of who is this community? Even just forget what you've heard about the ACB community in the news, in the newspaper, on the radio. Going there and sitting to listen as to how the community sees themselves from an Afrocentric way of knowing. Because historically, this is a community that has been subordinated and also suppressed. So when you do research in these marginalized, communities, please remember that in the indigenous community as well, always.
And if I could just use an example of how these principles translate. So my husband is doing his PhD in history at York University. He's 59 years old, and he's studying the changing face of the gay villages in Toronto, and he's doing deep interviews with men who are older than he is, who have experienced a change, and I won't go into that. First thing he does is identify he's a gay man, right? And doesn't send them the survey, right? He says, can we go out for a coffee? And he spends that time and he listens and he forms that relationship. He has agency because he's a gay man who's 59 years old. But you don't necessarily have to be a gay man who's 59 years old, but you do have to listen. You have to spend that time and you have to form that relationship. And so these principles translate across different types of communities in our larger community.
Thank you for all of this today. It's really been inspiring because sometimes as an evaluator, it gets you get a little bit bogged down. You get a little cynical, so this was needed today. And I'm going to pick on Funke a little bit. So one thing, to return the favor. One thing we're talking about system shifts, at least what I've noticed as an evaluator, I started out doing health research impact evaluations, so working with researchers about their impacts. And you're right, it's not just about your publication counts and the bibliometrics, and it's not even about leveraged funding. And I had like a few aha moments with researchers where it's like, yeah, but so what? And they don't like being asked that. So I found other ways of asking it after a while, but really getting at the so what of your research and why you do it and articulating it can be a challenge even for researchers. So that's an aha moment. And then I moved into working in community with nonprofits and in public health for the last few years, reporting to government. I'm having the same kinds of problems around talking about impact of work. So the researchers are focused on their academic kind of outputs. And the community says, well, this many people came to a workshop, or this many patients came to our clinic, and we're doing great work. I'm like, but so what? And they didn't like that either, but but when you get around to it, when you start actually getting at the so what, those stories are so much more powerful. And when you have evidence to support those stories, like you go out, you talk to community, you get that qualitative data, which I love, as well as the numbers, it starts to shift things a little bit. And I'm going to pick on Funke now, because what we learned together is the other component is the funder or the government. They always, they make such strict requirements for funding in these annual reports or final reports on projects, and they don't always get it, and they're asking the wrong questions. They're asking you to get the wrong data. So a lot of times I come in saying, okay, well, this is what we need to do to make them happy, but what's going to make you, what do you need to make you happy as a community? And then it's extra work, right? So educating the funder or the government, if anyone can do that, that's a systemic change I'd love to see happen, but they ask for this low-hanging fruit, the easy things to measure, and it's not the meaningful stuff to measure. So these stories, if you can tell them about the impacts you're having with that evidence and get them out there so that other researchers, other community members here, it's like, if we work together, if we do this, if we plan for impact and collect some data around that, we'll be more impactful. We'll just kind of spread. That's my goal, that's my...
Yes, no, I remember those days, Dorothy. And what we did and what I decided to do with that project was, so this was a project looking at the experiences of ACB youth who identify as 2S LGBTQ+, and their interactions with the justice, mental health, and immigration systems, using an intersectional lens. And the evaluation was very rigid, yes, and we were not... That's what the funder wanted, and we needed the funding, right, as a nonprofit to do the work. So one of the amazing things I have done was, with a little bit of money from that project, I was able to go back to the funder and said, I want to give back to the youth who contributed to this project. the 25 of them, right, and shared their individual stories. So what I did was I was able to get a little bit of money to work with our artist collective to create a digital, I always say a comic, but my staff laughs at me that I'm aging myself. I think comics are still a thing, right? So we're able to create a comic, a visual for the youth and give back to them. That, for me, is a product that Ribbon Rouge is proud of, irrespective of all those amazing things that the funder was asking for us to report on. And they agreed with it, and they loved it. Sometimes funders are so stuck on their own outcomes to build another report, and another report that goes all the way to maybe Trudeau, I don't know, that they forget what is, and they were like, oh my God, this is brilliant. I'm like, yeah, but you wanted us to do all of this before, right? So that was how I gave, we're working on that comic right now. And that was a very interesting way for me to get around something for Ribbon Rouge, and most importantly, for community that contributed too. So each youth gets a free copy of that digital storybook. It's going to be a composite storybook.
Okay, while that battery's being changed, any other questions? Excellent. Was it?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a really great panel, super inspiring. So my question's kind of related to all panelists or whoever feels called upon to respond to this. So in terms of researching a stigmatized or a taboo topic in a community, I think it's really important to create that safe discussion space. So as you mentioned, to get people talking. So based off your experiences with various diverse communities, what do you think are important elements of this safe space?
That in and of itself was a great answer, but I don't mind starting. I think one of the things I learned as an undergrad student was questioning questions. So a prof gives you a question, a funder gives you a question. It's important to actually scrutinize the question. Right? And so oftentimes when we're approaching taboos within communities, oftentimes what we're positing is that there's a conflict between, say, a Western worldview and maybe a different culture's worldview. An example I can think of is often talking about mental health. And oftentimes how we approach mental health in different communities is with this assumption that there's a deficit and a taboo, rather than saying that these communities are actually very rich in social connection and alternative ways of addressing mental health, and that there might be some deficits in terms of the explanation and the way that we're translating knowledge. And so I think it's important, rather than just assuming taboo and assuming that our duty is to translate a Western worldview to another community or get them to see things in a Western way. I think there's a real value in thinking about how do we be the bridge, how do we understand some of the deeper issues that are there. So in that mental health example, I think it's how do we think about understanding the traditional ways of addressing mental health, which is often through building social capital for individuals, understanding the challenges of that approach in communities that are dislocated, and seeing different ways of asking those questions.
Yeah. So I think that's a very, very good question, right? And, obviously, the engineering side of me is saying, okay, well, what's the pathway to the solution, right? For the space, right? So I'm kind of thinking, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3. And I'll tell you pretty much, how we addressed it, at least through the elite program, right? So mental health was a big one for us. There's a stigma in the Black community. Again, you hear it all the time in the Jamaican culture. You're not mad. Where I got that? They kind of come out with that, right? The same thing with LGBTQ plus issues as well. So, but what we do know that the Black community loves is everybody's daughter or son to go, or whoever, to go and be a doctor. a lawyer, engineer, right? So we built this program, it's around some, but built in it is a wellness and coaching series with a certified clinical psychologist who's leading the series to talk about resiliency, to talk about being Black in the professional environment. But we've also built in that space for one-on-one conversations about whatever the interns who are between 15 and 22 want to talk about. Maybe they want to be an artist, but mom or dad wants them to be a surgeon. They don't want to do that. How do they get that out there? How do they get some advice and talk about that in a safe space, right? So we've actually built the space within the program. And yeah, maybe it's, we're putting it out there that it's a STEM, it is a STEM-based program, but we have that support built in wraparound in the program. That has helped brilliantly to create that safe space for the interns and for the students, right? So my, suggestion, in response to your question would be to try to embed the space within other programs to help to kind of, bridge that to Omar's, earlier point, because from experience, it has worked really, really well with the community. Thank you.
So I'll just add 30 seconds to everything they both said as well. These are real issues, and like Omar said, sometimes we bring the definitions from the Western lens. Another issue that we work around lots at Ribbon Rouge is HIV and STBBIs, so sexually transmitted blood-borne infection. Beyond the Black community, in every community, we know that there's still lots of stigma around those issues, right? And there's a lot of misinformation. So I think we're in an institution. Education is key as well, to build on what André is saying. Education is key, but how you bring that education and how you talk about the issue in any space you create is also important. So that's a space that there's a lot of discrimination, for lack of a better word, and marginalization. I don't like using those words, but I will use them in that space, especially when it comes to African Caribbean Black people in the healthcare system and how they really they get services and access to care and things like that. So one thing we've done is to really bring the right information to community, embed it in other spaces where we go to community and we don't wait for community to come to us sometimes. What are the natural already existing spaces where you can embed some of these conversations? Because trust has already been built in those spaces, and you can speak about it. A colleague of mine was talking about they were doing a town hall last weekend, and it was in a different language. And because trust had been built in that space and people were okay with each other in the ACB, one of the ACB communities, and someone said, you know what, I don't have my status. Can I talk about it here? But they were like, yeah, go ahead. What do you need? So when there's trust and when people feel comfortable, you can bring in the uncomfortable, and it's okay.
I'm aware we're at time, and I want to thank the four of you very, very much for your time. I've heard the beginnings of, I think, what will emerge into many conversations. I feel like there's a lot of energy I can feel from my community partners. I see eyes, and not even just community partners, but all of you here today, because some of you are new to CUP and to our work. So I very much appreciate you being here today. I hope you have gained an idea, an inspiration for a small step for yourself in your work that can be the next step for change for you. And thank you so very much to the four of you for joining us today and making such an incredible conversation about how we can affect change in community-engaged research and innovation.
Did the lightning strike?
You'll have to ask these guys.